If Colby grabs my wrist, the mirrored wrist, so he grabs with his right arm or right hand, my left hand or left wrist, I can come straight across, and as I do, I want to block his wrist, step back. I'm going to try to go right through this gap here. Now, it can make it a little bit easier if I can make my arm across this axis here. This is the wide part of my arm going through that gap. This would be the narrower part of my arm going through that gap. So as I try to go through that gap, I'm going to turn. I can go into a 2-on-1 from that position. The other thing is I can just push from that way as well. Colby grabs in this position. I'm going to come up in this way. Again, against that gap, the sharp part or the thin part of my arm coming against the gap, and I can get the angle. And then perhaps initiate an attack. But in any case, your opponent should not be able to hold on to this very easily. Should not be able to hold on to this type of a position very easily. This is a very simple way to block. Another possibility with that same type of a grip is a simple duck under. If I've tried this and I'm not successful and we're fighting in here and I can't pop this off, one option here is to duck. When you duck, when I duck in this type of situation, I'm going to step, so I step, my hips go all the way down to my heels, and I'm going to come up. I'm going to step down and up. As I windmill or throw my arm back, and I'm throwing my arm back and windmilling my arm to get my opponent to get his weight slightly forward. And that'll give me the opportunity, both the position as well as the time, to be able to duck under. So Colby's in this position here. I just drop down. 1, 2, drop, up. And you'll notice too, 1, 2, drop. So 1, 2, drop. Notice my head, as I'm coming up, is going to be turning in. In other words, I'm not going to be going just straight up. I want to keep pressure on my opponent. So I'm in here, 1, 2, drop, and I'm going to be coming through. Typically, I want to grab a piece of Colby with my opposite arm, and typically that's going to be around his neck. So I'm in here, that position. From here, once I'm in here, okay, I can drop to double and chop, or I can simply lift from this position. But I do want to get a piece of him, and notice when I do the duck, my direction after I've lowered my level very much, my hips are to my heels here, I want to be driving into my opponent. And a lot of times too, if you give him a little bit of energy in, he'll give you a little bit of energy back, and notice this hand here just goes around. If I whip my arm hard back as I'm lowering my level, typically my opponent's going to be moving over me. Again, having lost his balance, it's at that point he's recovering. I drive in and I can secure my grip. From this position here, again, Colby might be holding on to this pretty tight. I'm in a good position here. I can lift from here, or I can stay low. All things being equal, I prefer typically to chop. Lifting typically requires a fair amount of energy. Chopping typically requires a lot less energy. So my preference, generally speaking, is not to lift. Although when you do lift, as we discussed in a previous module, pop up. I'm not lifting with my back. I'm not even lifting like this, although this is acceptable. I prefer typically to lift them like this. I'm going to lift them with my hips, coming up on my toes. If Colby grabs my cross wrist here, in other words, his right hand is attacking my right hand, as we did in the first module, just from here, simply go to 2-on-1 is a good option from this position here. He can't hold on very good from this position. So even if he has my wrist here, he can't hold on. And even if he does too, as hard as he holds on to that wrist, you can snap him down. Colby grabs the cross wrist here. We're in position. I don't want to get in a dog fight here where we're just sort of working off each other's strength, especially if Colby here is stronger. I'm going to attack at the angle. Get my head in. I stay high on the shoulder. I'm going to defeat his grip like this. If I can't defeat his grip because he's in tight here, I'm going to shuck him down to the mat. And the harder he holds on to this, the more successful I'm going to be, because one, he's having a lot of attention devoted to this hand, which he thinks I'm still trying to pull away. And also, he's got no post or anything to support him over here. He is going to let go of your hand as his trajectory goes downward, simply because he knows at that point, if he doesn't, he's going to hit his head on the mat. So he's going to release that, most typically, to block his fall. And at that point, he'll be on top of him and behind. From this position to here, I'm going to try to come out. If I can't do that, I just shuck and get on top. If your opponent or partner grabs both wrists, one option is similar to what we did with the single wrist grab, and that is I bring both of them together, and if I can't come this way to hit this one, I can probably come the other way, and you just have to feel that. But you should be able to, depending upon your opponent or partner's motion, hit one or the other. And first I get one and secure it here. From here, we can go into various maneuvers as we did during the first module and setups. But my point here is, when they have you in this type of position, I'm still going to pop through. And again, too, if you'll notice, in this situation, again, I want to keep the thin part of my arm coming through the gap. So if I'm going to work on this side, I'm not just going to pull my arm this way so that the wide part, the wide axis of my wrist is exposed to this little gap. I want to make the narrow axis exposed. So from here, Colby has me here, I'm going to be popping like this. And it's very difficult for him to hang on there. Same time. And as I do, so as I'm popping this wrist, the angle changes on my wrist so that this thin part of this thin axis here is coming through the gap. Now, another alternative is if my opponent has both of my wrists, I can try an attack directly from here. If that fails, and typically the first motion will, so this is really a feint on the one side. Here, I come to the opposite side. Feint one side, come up on the other side. And a ducking motion, you'll notice when I duck, the feint is not much of a level change. But when I do my actual duck, I have a good level change on this side. Come up and into my opponent. Feint on one side, come up.